The story begins with introducing the legendary Hitokiri Batosai and how he was the most feared warrior in Japan during the Bakumatsu and disappeared afterwards. Kamiya Kaoru met Himura Kenshin on the nearby streets of Tokyo, whom she had mistakenly confused for a man running wild and killing people on the street while claiming to be Batosai. After realizing that Kenshin is a Rurouni or wanderer who wields a sakabato, that is, reverse blade sword that is specifically designed for users not intending to kill, she is convinced that he is not really the Batosai she is trying to pursue. The two of them then hear people screaming, and Kaoru runs towards the action in order to deal with the alleged Batosai. Kaoru suffers a shoulder injury during the encounter, and just as the killer is about to finish her off, Kenshin rescues her and takes her to the dojo, though she faints on the way. Kaoru gets her wound taken care of by Hiruma Kihei, a servant she rescued from the street time ago after her father, Kamiya Koshijiro, died in the Seinan Wars. After that, the wanderer leaves the dojo. A couple of days later, Kaoru is walking on the streets with Kihei when they recognize the Rurouni being captured by the police for carrying a sword, which is against the current law. They intercede for the wanderer, and after Kihei bribes the police, they let the Rurouni go free. Then Kihei goes to the Kamiya dojo, leaving Kaoru and the wanderer talking on the street. He asks Kaoru some questions about Kihei, and Kaoru mentions that she does not care about other people's past. She also reveals that there is a suspicious place called Kihei-kan Dojo outside town. The Rurouni thanks Kaoru and leaves again. The Rurouni goes to the Kihei-kan Dojo, surrounded by thugs threatening him. Meanwhile, at the Kamiya dojo, Kihei interrupts Kaoru in the dojo hall and wants to talk to her about selling the dojo. Kaoru refuses to, as usual, but Kihei needs her signature as he already has papers for the sale ready. Just as Kaoru remains in shock, the door busts open. At that moment, Gohei breaks into her dojo with a bunch of his pupils to force Kaoru to sign. Just as he is about to accomplish that, the doors open and a man from the Kihei-kan dojo appears, falls down, and behind him is the Rurouni. He states that Kaoru's ideals are play talk for those who have never stained their hands, and the truth is that swords are weapons designed for murder. However, right afterward, he says that he prefers Kaoru's play talk over the truth and desires a world where her play talk can become the truth, which lights a smile on Kaoru's face. Gohei asks his men to kill the wanderer and make him suffer. He warns them to stay back to avoid being hurt, but they mock him and attack, resulting in all of them being badly defeated. He then tells Gohei that Batosai practices neither the Kamiya Kashin Ryu nor whatever style he uses, but practices Hiten Mitsurugi Ryu. This style will surely kill anyone unless used with a sword like his own, that is, a sakabato. Gohei then tries to attack the Rurouni, saying he's the only one worthy of the name Batosai, but the wanderer easily defeats him. The wanderer also threatens Kihei, but he faints in fear. Finally, the Rurouni destroys the papers for sale. The Rurouni then apologizes to Kaoru for hiding the fact that he is the Batosai and proceeds to leave. Kaoru tells him not to leave because she needs his help to fix up the dojo and bring in more students, since they'd all left due to the bad reputation Gohei was giving the Kamiya Kashin Ryu name. To which he says that if the real Batosai stayed, it would only bring her more trouble. She replies that she does not want the Batosai to stay, but the Rurouni to stay, although she stops at Rurouni, unable to finish her sentence. She then tells him he can leave if he wants, but should at least tell her his real name. Kenshin does so and decides to stay, saying that a bit of rest from wandering would do him good. Now that Kenshin will stay with Kaoru, she questions him about his age. That Kenshin has to figure out with some old-fashioned counting. Even with the Batosai case involving the Hiruma brothers, Gohei and Kihei was resolved. Students are not returning to the Kamiya dojo. An angered Kaoru takes off to the marketplace with Kenshin to shop. As they cross a wooden bridge en route to that other dojo, a kid bumps into Kenshin and attempts to steal his wallet. Kaoru prevents him from doing so. Kenshin tells Kaoru to let it go and allows the kid to keep the money he stole, which insults him even further to the point where he throws the wallet at Kenshin's head, telling him that he's a proud descendant of Tokyo samurai and that he hasn't sunk so low to be pitied by others. Kenshin apologizes to the kid and tells him that even though he's a child, his heart is mature like that of an adult. Kenshin returns to the dojo, and later a man with a long mustache and a carriage asked Kaoru about the location of the nearest police station. Kaoru wonders that she has never seen this man before in the town. It is then revealed that the kid works for a group of Yakuza who force him to steal money on their behalf. They warns him to get the money soon, as they will return in the evening. A stranger informed Kaoru that Kenshin is surrounded by police officers. After searching around, Kaoru finds Kenshin cornered against a wall by the sword police, armed police officers with the right to murder. Kaoru heads closer to the scene, but other sword police officers stop her. The head of the sword-bearing police, Ujiki, demands that Kenshin draw his sword. Otherwise, he and Kaoru will be killed before the public. The onlooking people all disagree, an uproar of negative comments towards the sword police, with the kid burglar also witnessing the scene. Ujiki provokes Kenshin by threatening Kaoru and asks the officers to kill anyone who ever interrupts. Kenshin is finally pushed over the line. He draws his sword and fights. At the police station, the man with a long mustache is talking to the police chief about the rumors of the legendary Batusai when they are interrupted by a police who warns them of an ongoing incident with the sword-bearing police and that they are fighting against a man with exceptional skills, orange hair, and a cross-shaped scar in his cheek. They realize he may be the legendary Batusai and rush to his encounter. Kenshin easily takes out all the members of the sword police, leaving only Ujiki as the last one standing. He promises to be arrested by Ujiki on the charges of illegally carrying a weapon, but he wants the safety of the people to be guaranteed. Ujiki won't let the Rurouni go so easily. With his sword raised at his side, Ujiki charges forward at Kenshin. Using his speed, Kenshin leaps over Ujiki and slashes him across the back with his sakabato. Instantly, Ujiki is knocked out. The man bearing the mustache appears before both Kenshin and Kaoru. The crowd runs over to hug the Rurouni as a sign of thanks and appreciation. The police disperse the crowd and take the sword police into custody for their abuse of power. The man is the chief of the Meiji government, Yamagata Aritomo. Once the crowd is cleared away, Kenshin greets Yamagata, but more importantly, Yamagata invites Kenshin to the position in the Meiji government awaiting him. Graciously, Kenshin declines the position. Even if he was one of the most important men that helped bring forth the Meiji government, Kenshin does not accept such an offer. Government power has corrupted such individuals as Ujiki, for example. Kenshin does not want to forget what all the fighting was for, a new era of happiness for the people of Japan. As Kenshin and Kaoru walk away from Yamagata, he asks Kenshin why he carries a sword when it's useless in the Meiji era. Kenshin turns around and answers, simply, it's to protect. The only thing that has changed is Himura Kenshin from a Hitokiri to a Rurouni. With that said, Kenshin and Kaoru depart. Kenshin then apologized to Kaoru for the trouble because of him. Kaoru simply smiled and said, help her with the shopping. Through a basic trip to the marketplace, Kaoru has learned much about the man now living at her home. The kid then helps an old woman who dropped her wallet instead of stealing the money for the Yakuza. Later that day, the kid sits on the waterfront, thinking about his current situation. Yahiko's heart is moved after watching Kenshin, and he decides to quit pickpocketing. The Yakuza thugs come back to collect his earnings for the month, but the kid, who they call Yahiko, tells them that he doesn't have any money and that he won't work for them anymore. This prompts a brutal beating from one of the thugs. Yahiko refuses to pay Kanto Shuegumi and resists their demands, but he is beaten up. Kaoru, walking home from practice, goes over the bridge above the river and sees Yahiko being carried away when looking down below. Yahiko being dragged back to the Yakuza's hideout. The boss tries to convince him to see the error of his ways and stick with pickpocketing for the Yakuza. But Yahiko rejected the offer once more, leading to his being beaten up further and reprimanded for not apologizing for his previous words. One of the Yakuza, manslayer Gasuke, insults Yahiko's dead parents. He becomes enraged and tries to fight back. He protests vigorously against the thugs insulting his father and mother, and then Gasuke raises his sword, preparing to kill him. However, before the manslayer can swing at Yahiko, Kenshin kicks in a door and knocks Gasuke to the floor. He stands back up to attack the intruder, but gets knocked up through the roof. Threatening the Yakuza's boss violently, Kenshin asked the boss to let Yahiko go in exchange for not getting into more fights, to which the boss agreed after seeing the look in Kenshin's eyes. Yahiko regrets that he could not solve the problem by himself and wishes to become stronger. Seeing this, Kenshin takes Yahiko to the Kamiya dojo. Kenshin and Yahiko return to the Kamiya dojo, where Kenshin introduced Yahiko to Kaoru as a student and master, to which both of them initially objected. As expected, their first day of training was unproductive, with the two calling each other names and refusing to submit to one another. The day after, around 15 people gathers at the Kamiya dojo trying to join after watching Kenshin's fight with the sword-bearing police, therefore wanting to learn kenjutsu from Kenshin. However, Kenshin drives them away by saying he won't be taking any students. This upsets Kaoru, who had gotten up her hopes of saving her dojo through those potential students. Later, as Kaoru is about to start teaching Yahiko, two former students of Kaoru burst into the dojo asking for help, they being chased by two men wielding scythes. Kaoru quickly dealt with them, prompting her former students to claim that they ran into a drunken group of men, causing a riot in town. The two held them down to stop them, but their friends arrived and resented them for their actions, leading to them being chased. A gang of outlaws soon follows them, the Hishimanji Guren gang. After retreating inside the dojo, Kaoru revealed that Kenshin left to go shopping, meaning they couldn't rely on him here. Yahiko then pointed out that Kaoru's former students are reeking of booze, accusing the two of them of starting the riot and drunkenly picking a fight. The two didn't deny this, instead apologizing to Kaoru. The Hishimanji Guren gang then began shooting clay cannonballs at the dojo out of a wooden cannon. It was then revealed that Kaoru's former students used swords and injured someone, prompting Yahiko to lecture them even more for coming back and seeking refuge in the dojo after misusing the lessons they learned. As their former teacher, Kaoru feels responsible for their dishonor and steps outside the dojo to meet the gang of outlaws, stating that she will take all the blame. This prompts Yahiko to follow her and attack the Hishimanji's leader, Hachisuka. The leader then states that he will kill Yahiko, but before he can attempt anything, Kenshin returns from shopping, telling the outlaws to stop their actions. The Hishimanji's leader, despite one of his men advising him otherwise, orders to firing of the cannon at Kenshin, who cuts its ball of clay in half with the edged part of his katana, to the shock of those present. The outlaws then go away, leaving the dojo alone. Kaoru's former students also go away in shame, being told by Kenshin to forget they were ever students at the Kamiya dojo and never again to pick up a sword. Kenshin then consoles Kaoru, telling her that while she can teach people, she won't reach all of them. Yahiko then proudly volunteered to become Kaoru's student, saying they needed to hurry up and clean up the dojo so they could practice, and determined to become as strong as Kenshin. At the Kamiya dojo, Yahiko is doing some morning kendo training while Kenshin cuts some wood with his sakabato. After bickering about distracting each other, suddenly Kaoru appears, really happy that she found an ink painting from her late grandfather, revealing that her grandfather was once a famous artist. She can sell the painting for a lot of money, and their financial issues are solved. She tells Kenshin and Yahiko that they should celebrate this and go out to a fancy restaurant for lunch. The three arrive at the Akabeko restaurant, where three men are heard arguing about politics and democracy. This focus is interrupted by Kenshin and the rest's arrival. A man eating by himself notices the sword on Kenshin's hip. While waiting for their food and drinks, they were commenting on the arguing men. Then suddenly, a bottle is thrown their way by them and Kenshin gets hurt. Yahiko stand up for Kenshin and Kaoru, prompting a screaming fight with them. Yahiko then asked them to apologize for their action, but they disagreed. However, the two are interrupted by the restaurant's manager Tai, requesting them to stop arguing. But she gets punched by one of the drunkards. However, before Kenshin and Yahiko can intervene, the man from earlier catches Tai, preventing her from falling. This is the same person who noticed Kenshin's sword earlier. The young man says he hates seeing someone be a bully or being a bully himself, but that he'll make an exception for these hypocrites, and then picks a fight with the thug who hit her. The strongest of the three thugs attacks with a suntetsu, a hidden metal spike, to the forehead of the fighter, but he didn't suffering any significant damage. The fighter then defeats the thug in a mere flick of his finger. One of the thug's friends is about to help him, but gets subtly threatened by Kenshin, so he and his companions leave, carrying their defeated friend on their shoulders. Tai thanks the man for helping her, but he replied, "The pleasure is all mine." The victorious fighter and Kenshin then have a brief, friendly exchange. He asserts that Kenshin knew the bottle was coming, but instead chose to take the hit to spare Kaoru. The young man then challenges Kenshin to a fight, but he declines, prompting the former to leave while telling Kenshin where he can be found. The kanji for evil clearly outlined on his back, and he leaves without paying his tab at the akabeko. The fighter talks with the Hiruma brothers Gohei and Kihei that night. Addressing the fighter as Zanza, Kihei reveals that the one called Kenshin is actually Hitokiri Batosai. This piques Zanza's interest, and he thus resolves to fight the Batosai with some weapon that he hasn't used in years. The next day, Zanza disappears, and both Gohei and Kihei get impatient as the days and weeks pass for Zanza to fight Kenshin. Zanza, catching them by surprise, reprimands them and tells that he has been fighting, but that a fight doesn't start with kicks and punches. He then goes to the Kamiya dojo to fight his target. At dojo, Kenshin says he felt someone's presence. Zanza is then shown to have arrived, calling Kenshin Himura Batosai to goad him into fighting. Zanza begins discussing Kenshin's history as Batosai, even detailing his roles as an imperialist fighter. This is also where Yahiko discovers Kenshin's true identity for the first time. Zanza declares his hate of the Isshin Shishi and says he wants to destroy the strongest of all of them, namely Kenshin, with all his heart. However, before he can attempt that, Kenshin and Zanza both detect the Hiruma brothers hiding behind a fence. The brothers come out, being urged to do so by the two combatants. Zanza grabs the gun Kihei was hiding, which he had planned to use once Kenshin had dropped his guard following his battle with Zanza, is confiscated and destroyed it, saying that this is his fight now and he won't allow such dirty tricks. Kenshin and Zanza then agree to head to the nearby riverbank for their fight since the dojo is a bit cramped. On the way, Kenshin talks to Yahiko about his true identity, with the young boy seemingly unbothered by knowing Kenshin for who he is now. Once arriving at the riverbank, Zanza reveals his actual name, Sagara Sanosuke, and an enormous sword, a zanbato, with which he will fight Kenshin. The zanbato is essentially a massive sword that is more akin to a hunk of metal than a refined and honed blade with the ability to cut. After Kenshin introduces himself, the pair then start their fight in earnest. Sanosuke attempts to crush Kenshin with his sword, but Kenshin dodges easily and slashes at Sanosuke with the blunt edge of his sakabato, knocking him to the ground. Sanosuke, however, stands back up unfazed. Kaoru becomes worried due to Sanosuke being the first opponent to get up after one of Kenshin's attacks. Sanosuke declares that the winner isn't always the better swordsman, but the one left standing. To this, Kenshin replies that he may say that after, he is the one left standing. Sanosuke and Kenshin being set to clash again. However, Kihei Hiruma told his brother Gohei that Sanosuke couldn't possibly win, adding that despite this fact, everything was still going according to his plan. Kenshin and Sanosuke briefly talked trash to each other before rushing at one another again. Sanosuke continuously failed to land an attack, prompting Kenshin to hit him with rapid-fire blows once an opening had been made. Once bloodied and on the ground, Kenshin pointed out how Sanosuke's weapon choice makes his attacks easy to read due to their inherent offensive limitations. While on the ground, Sanosuke remembers the time in the Sekiho army, a nationalist squad formed during the revolution. The group was led by Sagara Sozo, and their goal was to spread the word of the land tax halving order declared by revolutionary warriors. After setting up camp for the night, Sanosuke was seen speaking with Sozo, establishing the two's bond and the fact that Sanosuke clearly looked up to him. Sanosuke asks Sozo if he could take his surname of Sagara once the revolution was successful. After approving this, Sozo and Sanosuke returned to camp, where it was revealed that the government general has dubbed the Sekiho army a fake army to avoid actually going through with the land tax halving order. Sozo decided to march his army to the nearby Shimasuwa stronghold, telling a young Sanosuke and his friend Katsuhiro to stay behind. However, Sanosuke and Katsuhiro later discovered that Sozo had been captured and executed for the obviously falsified crime of leading a fake army and promoting the land tax halving order. Remembering his deceased Sekihotai leader, who was unjustly branded a traitor, the rage induced by this memory makes Sanosuke stand up, swearing that he'll bring down his opponent, the strongest of the patriots, which surprises Kenshin. He admired Sanosuke's strength when Kihei suddenly pulled out another pistol and shot Kenshin, sending him crashing to the ground. Thankfully, Kenshin was fine, and that he blocked the bullet just in time with the guard of his blade. Thinking quickly, Kihei points his gun at Kaoru and Yahiko, telling his brother Gohei to break their legs so they won't get away. Yahiko tries to fight Gohei while encouraging Kaoru to join him. However, Sanosuke then threw his zanbato at Gohei, slicing him across the face while reminding the two brothers that this was his fight alone. Meanwhile, Kihei once again points his gun at Kenshin, who calls him a hopeless soul and uses a technique of the heightened Mitsurugi Ryu, Dragon Nest Flash, to hit him in the body and face, knocking him down bloody and disfigured. After retrieving his sword, Sanosuke squared off with Kenshin once again. Sanosuke began twirling his blade, using centripetal force to make his attack even more powerful, while ranting about how fighting had let him forget everything in his past. Kenshin, unfazed, uses the edged side of his sakabato to cleave Sanosuke's weapon in two. Most of the weapon's blade falls to the ground. Then, Kenshin uses a technique of the hidden Mitsurugi Ryu, Dragon Hammer Flash, to strike at his opponent's head from high above. Sano takes the full brunt of the hit and yet remains standing. Kenshin, impressed, declares that Sanosuke is the first to take that attack and not fall. He then tells Sanosuke to stay there while he goes to fetch a doctor. Sanosuke, unwilling to let the battle end this way, declares that he will die before he loses to an Ishinshishi. Kenshin unexpectedly punches him in the face and reminds him that the Sekihotai, Sano's former companions, were about fostering a new era, not killing the Patriots. Sano protests, but is interrupted by Kaoru and Yahiko, who tell Sanosuke not to judge Kenshin merely by his affiliation with the Ishinshishi. Kenshin reveals to Sanosuke why he has been carrying a sakabato, to help people in need and to make amends for the people he has killed. Hearing this, Sanosuke gives up fighting and finally collapses, admitting his defeat to himself. The next day, Kenshin, Kaoru, and Yahiko meet Sanosuke in front of the Akabeko as he is effortlessly knocking some thugs out of the place. He tells the three of them that he is renouncing his Zanza identity and that, to figure out if Kenshin is really different from the rest of the Patriots with their empty ideals, he will stick around. He then leaves the premises of the Akabeko without paying as usual. Kenshin and Sanosuke are eating a meal in the Kamiya dojo, prepared by Kaoru. Yahiko says that one must endure the worst to live on. Sanosuke is disgusted by Kaoru's meal, while Kenshin is a little more polite. While Sanosuke and Kaoru argued, the chief of police arrived, requesting an audience with Kenshin so he could ask a favor. It's then revealed that the chief of police wants Kenshin to help fight a hitokiri from the revolutionary era by the name of Kurogasa. Kurogasa is described as a bloodthirsty assassin and skilled swordsman who hasn't failed to assassinate a target in 10 years. As the chief of police continued describing Kurogasa's modus operandi, Kenshin seemingly knew who they were talking about. This is confirmed when the chief of police reveals that Kurogasa seemingly paralyzed his enemies in his last attack, which Kenshin calls the Shin no Ippo attack of the Nikaido Heiho style. He also tells them of the next victim's name and time of death. Kenshin and Sanosuke are in the house of a government official named Tani. He initially rejected the chief of police's offer for help, but eventually acquiesced when Kenshin and Sanosuke made themselves known. It was also revealed that Kenshin knew Tani personally, as well as that Sanosuke had previously beaten each of the fighters Tani had hired. All fighters present then took up posts while waiting for 1 a.m., the time at which Kurogasa promised to strike. Sanosuke asked Kenshin questions about the attack and sword style he mentioned earlier, as well as whether or not he knew who Kurogasa was. Kenshin simply called it a rumor he heard over a dozen years ago. Suddenly, they heard a scream came from outside. All the fighters take their positions in the room, but Kurogasa snuck in through the window and attacked one of the men next to Tani. Tani tells his bodyguards that he'll pay them a great deal of money and give them positions as officers in the government if they take down this threat, causing them all to jump toward their doom. Kurogasa then tried paralyzing the fighters in the room, but Sanosuke and Kenshin both proved able to break free. Sanosuke recognized the attack as the one Kenshin was talking about. Kenshin then attacks Jin, cutting his straw hat in two, but receiving a cut in his left hand. He identifies him as Jin Udo, a rogue hitokiri during the Bakumatsu and a user of Shin no Ippo. This special technique causes a halt in the target's movements. Jin also knows that the one facing him is none other than the legendary Himura Batosai. Meanwhile, Yahiko is fast asleep in the dojo, but Kaoru waits for Kenshin, worried about his safety. She then gets up, steps outside the dojo, and stares at the moon. Kenshin then explained that the ability is merely a projection of one's fighting spirit, and that equal spirit from those paralyzed can be used to break free. Jin went to kill Tani as he had promised. Sanosuke was able to break free of the spell, takes a marble statue, and attacks Jin. His katana is broken, but then he uses the remaining piece to injure Sanosuke in the arm. He says that all the others are of no consequence to him and that he changes his target to Kenshin. Kenshin attacks Jin, and the two continue to exchange blades. Kenshin hits Jin in the head, which frees everyone from the Shin no Ippo technique. Jin says he is disappointed and has gotten very weak since abandoning his murderous ways. He then leaves the building, saying that he will return to find him again one day and that before then, he should return to being the Hitokiri he once was. Sanosuke realized that Kenshin had wanted this all along in order to prevent anyone else from being hurt or killed. On the way back to the Kamiya dojo, Kenshin explains Jin's technique and also tells Sanosuke that the only way for him to beat Jin is to return to being the Hitokiri he was during the Bakumatsu, since he stands no match for him at that point. Kenshin then asked Sanosuke for a favor, explaining that he plans to fight Udo alone. Sanosuke then returned to the dojo, where Kaoru was asleep after being up worrying for Kenshin all night. Kaoru then wake up and ask where Kenshin is, prompting Sanosuke to explain the situation and Kenshin's intent. After sharing that Kenshin went to scout out local riverbanks, Kaoru is broken up by the news and is about to run off, searching for Kenshin. Sanosuke tells her that Kenshin does not want anyone to interfere in his battle, but she says that if he defeats Jin, he'll return to his former self and will go off wandering again, and that she lost her mother and father and does not want to be left alone again. Kaoru then finds Kenshin and tells him that if he does not return to the dojo, then neither will she. Kenshin tells her that he cannot win against Jin if he is worried about her safety. Kaoru then realizes that it is best not to get in his way, but leaves him her favorite indigo ribbon, saying that if he does not return it to her, she won't forgive him. Kenshin agrees and promises to return with it to the dojo right after defeating Jin. Kaoru then smiles and holds Kenshin to his word. Jin suddenly appears and captures Kaoru, knowing that Kenshin will surely fight him more seriously when he is angered and his woman's life is jeopardized. He tells Kenshin that if he wants to save her, he must get angry and let his rage consume him, returning the Hitokiri he once was. Jin laughs hysterically and escapes while riding away in his boat. Kenshin is enraged and shouts out Jin's name. Kaoru has just been kidnapped by the sinister Jin. Kaoru accuses Jin of cheating, saying that he is afraid to fight fairly and is holding her hostage to put Kenshin at a disadvantage. Jin laughs at her ignorance, saying that he can easily defeat Batosai before finishing a cigarette, but says that would be no fun. Instead, he wishes to reawaken the Hitokiri inside Kenshin by making him surrender his anger. Kaoru tells him that he has no clue how powerful Kenshin really is, and Jin corrects her, saying that it is she who is clueless about Batosai's true power, as a Hitokiri who froze men's blood in fear during the Bakumatsu. He then recounts how he was a member of the Shinsengumi in Kyoto during the Bakumatsu and how he encountered Batosai and witnessed him killing several of his Shinsengumi comrades, but sparing his life. He desires a death battle between two Hitokiris, himself and Batosai. Kaoru tells him Kenshin is not like him and will never return to being a Hitokiri, to which Jin laughs at. Kenshin arrives just in time to face Jin, who notices and is pleased by the anger that is beginning to swell inside the former Hitokiri. Kenshin states that he is indeed angry at Jin for kidnapping Kaoru and himself for being unable to stop him from doing so. Kaoru notices a change in the tone of Kenshin's voice and realizes that he is not his usual self. The two warriors begin to battle and seem to be evenly matched. Jin then performs a series of moves, starting with a form of Hirazuki, a one-handed thrust, and ending with what appears to be a karatake, that is, downward slash. However, instead of ending with karatake, Jin sneakily switches hands from behind and thrusts his sword toward Kenshin, wounding him in the shoulder. Kaoru screams in worry as a pool of blood gushes from Kenshin's wounded shoulder. Jin says that his opponent is still far from the Hitokiri Batosai of the Bakumatsu since he still does not want to kill. He says that he can still win the battle before finishing 3 cigarettes. Still unsatisfied, Jin raises the stakes by performing a special and extra powerful version of Shin no Ippo on Kaoru, causing her lungs to paralyze and leaving her with 5 more minutes of life at most before she suffocates to death. He tells Kenshin that the only way for her to escape this fate is if she manages to break the Shin no Ippo, which he says is impossible since her spirit must be at least as good as his for this to occur, or if the user of the Shin no Ippo, that is, Jin, dies. Thus, it seems as though Kenshin is left with only 2 choices: to kill Jin or watch Kaoru die a horrible death. Jin tells Kenshin to harden up and pick up his sword with a desire to kill. Suddenly, Kenshin's speed amplifies, and he strikes Jin with a fast and hard blow, dislocating his nose and causing blood to gush out. Jin smiles in satisfaction, saying that not only was he unable to see the sword's path, he didn't even see his opponent's body move. He says that such skill is truly that of Hitokiri Batosai. Kenshin openly expresses his desire to kill Jin, which further worries the paralyzed Kaoru. Jin, on the other hand, can barely contain his excitement and puts his nose back in place. He charges towards Kenshin, and just as he is doing so, Kenshin exhibits his Kenki to Jin, causing him to jump to the side and stop his attack. Jin realizes that he must be at his fullest now to stand a match against Kenshin, so he uses Shin no Ippo on himself by using his blade as a mirror, the Hyoki technique which he had not used since leaving the Shinsengumi 15 years prior. This causes his power to amplify. Kenshin tells Jin that no matter his technique, his fate is sealed. Kenshin then goes into the Batojutsu stance, which causes Jin to worry, knowing that Batosai can pull the blade from his sheath at godlike speed and use the stance to slay opponents instantaneously. After a little thought, Jin believes that since his opponent is using a Sakabato, reverse blade sword, his sword draw will be slower, allowing him to dodge and take advantage of the moment when he is left defenseless. When the encounter occurs, it happens just as Jin had hoped. However, Kenshin surprises him by using the blade's sheath to attack and break his arm when Jin believed him to be defenseless. Jin realizes that Kenshin had used a double Batojutsu, incorporating the sword and the sheath together. The move used was So Ryu Sen, Twin Dragon Flash. Kenshin tells Jin that he knew of the disadvantages of using a Sakabato for Batojutsu, but that he perfected Batojutsu in every way, which is why he was named Batosai. He then tells Jin that his life as a swordsman is over since his elbow joint was crushed and his ligaments torn. He then says that his life will end with his hand. However, Kenshin still hesitates to finish his opponent. Jin smiles and tells Kenshin that the only way for him to lift the Shin no Ippo from Kaoru is to go through with the kill. Kenshin says that to protect Kaoru, he will become a Hitokiri again. Jin laughs hysterically, saying that it is an honor for him to meet his end at the hands of the legendary Hitokiri. Just as Kenshin is about to kill Jin, Kaoru begins to remember Kenshin's words, that he would prefer a world where the ideals of Katsujinkan, that is, the sword that gives life, would be a reality. She then breaks free of the Shin no Ippo hold on her and shouts desperately for Kenshin to stop. She tells him not to use the sword that takes life. As she says this, she falls down, but Kenshin grabs her and ensures she is all right. Jin is surprised that Kaoru could break free of his hold on her. He heads towards Kenshin and Kaoru and draws his sword. Kenshin tells him that he can do nothing with a broken arm and that he should peacefully be arrested, but Jin says that there is still one more thing left. He then stabs himself through the heart and says, "This is a good feeling," before dropping to the ground. Kenshin then stares at him with a sad look on his face, and Jin tells him that he does not like that look on his face. He prefers the sinister look when he wants to kill. He then reveals that a government official hired him and that a power struggle similar to the Bakumatsu era is still unfolding in the contemporary government. He tells Kenshin that he is a Hitokiri from the inside, coming from one Hitokiri to the other. Such a statement is no mistake. He also tells him that he, a Hitokiri, can never be anything else until he dies. His last words to Kenshin are that he will look on from the edge of hell and see how long Kenshin can stay as a Rurouni without reverting back to his true nature. Kenshin and Kaoru walk home on the city streets. Kaoru thanks Kenshin for saving her, but Kenshin says that he is the one who should be thanking her. He then thinks that if Kaoru hadn't shouted at him back when he was about to kill Jean, he would have reverted to his old self. He then gives her Kaoru's indigo ribbon, which is all bloodied due to Kenshin's shoulder injury during the battle. This angers Kaoru and chases Kenshin on the street. They arrive at the Kamiya Dojo, where Yahiko and Sanosuke welcome them home. A mysterious woman ran away from two people chasing her. Meanwhile, in dojo, Kaoru is looking for Kenshin, and Yahiko reveals that he has gone somewhere with Sanosuke. Yahiko further says that they went to a restaurant to gamble. Sanosuke gambles with Kenshin and a couple of friends called Ginji and Tomo while seeking Kenshin's advice. Where Kenshin has been reluctantly helping to keep track of the dice so Sanosuke can win big, he's constantly winning and seems to be in a good mood. The woman from earlier being chased into the restaurant where Sanosuke and Kenshin are. Sanosuke then asks about a fellow patron, and it's revealed they died earlier this month from an opium overdose. Kenshin then points out how an ordinary man shouldn't be able to buy a hoard of such an expensive drug. The woman on the run suddenly appears in the restaurant where Sanosuke and his friends were gambling. She notices Kenshin's sword lying beside him and jumps towards him, embracing him and asking for his help. The two men chasing her also appear and identify her as Takane Megumi. One of them tries to capture her, but is easily tossed aside by Sanosuke, who is in an especially bad mood after learning of Yoita's fate. It is learned that these two are henchmen for an underground criminal named Takeda Kanryu. Megumi is asked why they are after her, and she claims not to know what they are after. After that, a small man appears, Bishimi, who seemingly entered from the building's ceiling, laughing and accusing Megumi of being a lying deceiver in the pretense of an innocent woman. Megumi vows to him that she will never return to Kanryu, and he throws spiral darts toward her, which hit Ginji and Tomo, causing blood to draw from them. He then tells Megumi that he will fire the next ones at both her legs. He fires away, but Kenshin blocks the darts with a nearby mat and his sakabato, saying that even though he doesn't understand what is happening, he cannot allow innocent people to be hurt. He and Sanosuke then punch the man in the face, knocking him out. While trying to grab Megumi to force her to answer about the situation, mysterious tiny packets drop from her pocket. One of the other patrons reveal are the same ones found at the house of their friend who died from an overdose. Sano is disturbed by this and begins to suspect Megumi. Kenshin asks if this is what she meant by a reward, to which she says nothing. Back at the Kamiya dojo, Kaoru and Yahiko continue training. Kenshin and Sanosuke return home with Megumi, and Kaoru is not too happy to see her, especially after Sanosuke tells Kaoru they won Megumi from the bets. Kaoru asks Kenshin about this, and he follows the lie, told by Sanosuke that they should hide the opium topic from the conversation. This causes Kaoru to start beating up Kenshin, even though he didn't do anything. Megumi begins flirting with Kenshin and tells everyone she is surprised by Kaoru's rash and unladylike behavior. Megumi doubts that a little sweaty dojo girl like her can be Kenshin's lover. Megumi then starts sensually holding Kenshin, asking him whether or not he prefers her to Kaoru. This completely enrages Kaoru, who throws Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Megumi out from the dojo. Another friend of Sanosuke, named Shu, arrives on the street and tells them to follow him. They go to a bridge where they discover the police is investigating two murdered men, the same two thugs that were pursuing Megumi. Among the crowd, they watch three people. The same short man who threw spiral darts, a mysterious tall man with fringe-banged style hair wearing a trench coat, and a young man with glasses and an Occidental suit. Megumi informs everyone that the man wearing an Occidental suit is Takeda Kanryu, a shady businessman, and that the tall man wearing a trench coat is Shinomori Aoshi, the boss of the Oniwabanshu, a group of shinobi who are working for Takeda Kanryu. Beshimi, the Okashira, and Takeda Kanryu discover Kenshin, Sanosuke, and Megumi far away in the crowd. The Okashira asks Beshimi if they are the ones who broke his nose. Aoshi is shown not to be a henchman for Kanryu since he acts independently and clearly tells the latter not to butt into his affairs. Kanryu is okay with that as long as Megumi is retrieved. Shinomori talks with someone named Hanya, who appears to be hiding among the crowd, and asks him if he has any information. Hanya tells the Okashira about Megumi's location in the Kamiya dojo. The Okashira orders him and another of his underlings, Hyotoko, to help Beshami retrieve her. Back in the dojo later that day, Megumi informs Kenshin of Kanryu, saying that he has 60 bodyguards and, separate from them, are his most dangerous associates, the Okashira's soldiers. She tells Kenshin that these soldiers are distinct from his other bodyguards and are members of the Oniwa Banshu. Megumi thinks to herself that if the Oniwa Banshu pursues her, even Kenshin won't be able to help her and that she must escape somewhere else soon. Kenshin then asks Megumi why Kanryu is so bent on finding her, but she refuses to answer him, saying that it is none of his business. Meanwhile, Kaoru attempts to eavesdrop on their conversation. However, Sanosuke notices this and reprimands her. Sanosuke tells her that it's fine and not to worry, since Kenshin is just doing what comes naturally to him. She tries to make excuses, saying that she only wants to know what is happening since Kenshin and Megumi have been spending all night together in a single room. Kenshin then comes out of the room and tells Kaoru and Sanosuke that they are dealing with the Oniwabanshu, who are probably already aware of Megumi's location. Kenshin tells Kaoru that there will most likely be trouble ahead, but that she can be assured that he will protect her. Yahiko then appears from under the floorboards, asking why he's the only member of Team Kenshin being left out of the situation. He wants to get in on the action too. Megumi observes the group and remembers her family and old friends. Suddenly, a ginormous fat man appears out of nowhere and breaks through the dojo's surrounding wall. He demands Megumi be handed over quietly in exchange for going easy on them. Next part of the video is coming soon. Thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel.